Private members' business, notice number 2, motion on the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic relationship with Poland.
And I give the call to member for McKellar.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move the motion relating to the 50th anniversary of the diplomatic relationship with Poland in terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
The member for McKellar.
Thank you. In 1972, diplomatic relations between Australia and Poland began. While today I rise to celebrate 50 years of formal relations, we must also recognise that the strong partnership between our countries we enjoy today was born many decades earlier. Today I am honoured to acknowledge the long history of Polish settlement down under. Tales of Poles settling in Australia and contributing to our nation's development date back to the early days of the 19th century. For as long as there has been an Australia, there has been Polish Australians. The partnership between our two nations has been made stronger by our shared ideals. At the siege of Tobruk during World War II, Australian and Polish forces fought side by side. In the aftermath of World War II, thousands of Poles fleeing that dark era in our history, Deputy Speaker, when nations fell into the darkness of communism oppression, migrated to Australia. Among them were my grandfather, my grandmother and my father. These were people who sought refuge in Australia, dreaming of hope and opportunities their new home would offer. Decades on, Australia and Poland's relationship remains stronger than it's ever been. Polish Australians have made and continue to make significant contributions to all aspects of Australian society, from sharing their diverse culture to their vital role in our nation's economic success and innovation. The Polish community in Australia today are dedicated to preserving our history and promoting Polish-Australian cultural ties through the work of numerous community clubs and groups across our nation. Polish Australians strive to enrich the lives of those around us by both acknowledging our heritage and appreciating our new home. Members of the Polish community should be proud of all we have accomplished and contributed to Australia. The presence of an Australian embassy in Warsaw is central to our bilateral relationship. The embassy offers significant support to Australians visiting and living in Poland. The embassy never fails to promote the spirit of Australia in Poland. Between 2015 and 2019, total merchandise trade between Australia and Poland grew by 11%. In 2019, Australian investment into Poland reached $1.2 billion, and Australians enjoyed nearly $2 billion worth of merchandise imports from Poland. In terms of exports, Poland continues to seek Australian resources and services to support its growing economy. Both nations benefit from our strong bilateral, academic and business relationships. I'm proud to be part of a government that remains cognizant of the benefit of free trade and accordingly continuously seeks opportunities to promote Australian business abroad. I commend the work of the Australian Embassy in promoting Australian trade and investment interests in Poland and the numerous Australian companies that already operate in Poland. Further to our cultural and economic support of each other, Poland and Australia are true friends. Both nations have proven their commitment to our relationship time and time again through numerous formal agreements and gestures of goodwill. For example, in 2012, the Australian government donated $500,000 to support the preservation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Site. And of course, Frank Lowy, an Australian businessman, was instrumental, he and his family, in preserving that site. So we will never forget the atrocities that can occur when we turn and look away. While following the Black Summer bushfires, the Kosciulsko National Park, which I have absolutely mispronounced, Madam Deputy Chair, received generous donations from Poland. They, of course, would call it the Kosciusko National Park. With Australia's borders reopening, I look forward to welcoming many Polish visitors back. Deputy Chair, the other thing that I want to mention is that a dark period in our history was the totalitarian state that took over Poland. This is a proud nation For hundreds of years it didn't exist except in the hearts and spirit of those members of Poland. But when freedom came, it first came to Poland through Lech Walesa and the boatyards of Poland. Millions of people were set free.
The member's time has expired. Is the motion seconded?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to second the motion. Moved by the member for McKellar.
Thank the member for Cooper and give the call to member for Cooper.
Thank you. Polish Australians have made a great contribution to this country over the last 50 years and way back further, prior to formal diplomatic relations between our two countries. Following the atrocities of the Second World War, Australia received an influx of Polish refugees. The Polish-born population increased from 6,500 to more than 56,000 people between the years of 1957 and 1966. Most arrived from war-torn Europe, though some came from various theatres of battle, having fought with Australians throughout the war, such as in Tobruk. Many brought with them memories of the horrors of the war, some from concentration camps, others from various fronts. And though they were grateful to find a welcoming home, it was the new Polish-Australian community which got them through these horrors and helped them to settle into their new homes. This lasting connection with their homeland has meant a thriving diaspora community exists in Australia, with a significant presence through community groups as well as sporting clubs. These are particularly prevalent in my home city of Melbourne, which has the largest Polish-Australian population in the country. That Polish-Australian community has, of course, blessed us with people like Dr. Karl, Magda Zabanski, the member for McKellar, and, of course, the terrific Premier of Queensland, Anastasia Palaszczuk. Today, though, I want to tell the story of one Pole in particular who is not as well known. His name is Sławomir, or Stan, Lesek. Stan was born in Warsaw in 1926 and was barely a teenager when Poland was invaded in 1939. Like so many young Poles, Stan was unable to complete his education, and he took up arms and joined the Polish resistance, fighting mainly in the mountains in Poland's south. He was caught by the Germans and arrested, but managed to escape and rose through the ranks, fighting proudly in defence of his country. Stan Lesek lost his father in the war and many other family members, some in the deadly concentration camps established by the German regime. When the war came to an end in 1945, Stan decided to flee Poland, which came under the control of Russia, and he started a new life in England, where he married Barbara and where they had 4 sons. In the late 1960s, Stan and Barbara made what they described as the best decision of their life, emigrating to Australia. The family settled in Wollongong, where Stan worked at the Port Kembla Steelworks. He coached junior soccer, and Stan was without doubt one of the biggest supporters of the Socceroos, as they created history by qualifying for the World Cup finals for the first time in 1974. Stan, Barbara and the boys didn't hesitate in becoming naturalised Australian citizens in the early 70s. And in 1975, Stan and Barbara joined tens of thousands of others outraged by the dismissal of Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, taking to the streets in protest. Stan loved Australia's landscape, such a far cry from the dense forests of his native Poland. And in 1988, having moved to the bush, he was named the Galar-Gambone Citizen of the Year for his amazing tree planting efforts, trying to green one of the driest parts of our continent. In his later years, Stan travelled to Canberra to receive his long overdue wartime medals from the Polish ambassador. What made Stan even prouder, though, was receiving Poland's highest military medal posthumously on behalf of his late father, Antonio, who was recognised as a national hero by those who fought with him in World War II. Stan Lesek, like so many, was a proud Pole. He had risked his life for his birthplace, but like so many of his fellow compatriots, it is Australia that made him happiest. Stan would have turned 96 last week, and while sadly he's no longer with us, his memory and his legacy continue to live on through his 4 proud boys. Stan is a terrific example of the contributions of our Polish-Australian community and the values that form the basis of the relationship between those two peoples. And it is these shared values that must underpin this relationship for years to come. In recent times, Poland and the European Union have been in a bitter feud over a wide array of issues. These include efforts to marginalise its LGBTIQ community, its assertion that Polish law is paramount to EU law, its reluctance to phase out fossil fuels in line with Europe's ambitious climate policy, and a move away from the independence of its judiciary. On this 50-year anniversary of diplomatic ties, we are reminded of Australia's responsibility to engage with allies like Poland on issues such as these, and to assert the importance of these issues as core to our relationship.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I give the call to the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on this important private member's bill motion by the member for Mackellar, and commend him for his fine words, and commend also the member for Cooper. And Stan Lesek's is a story that is so typical, not just of Poles, but of so many countries all around the world. It's a fabulous migrant story, and thank you for sharing it with the House. Poland is a good friend of Australia, Madam Deputy Speaker, and indeed, as the member for Mackellar has indicated with this motion, our friendship extends beyond the half-century of formal years of diplomatic relations. Our ties with this small country, which measures only about 4% the size of Australia, are in fact far greater and far longer than just that. Our ties, of course, stretch back to World War II, as the member for Mackellar indicated, in the trenches of Europe, defending Allied territory against Adolf Hitler in the protection of freedom, with our troops, our diggers, our men, our women as well, making sure that they did what they could to prevent the spread of totalitarianism and indeed later on communism. Our troops fought alongside Poles in the siege of Tobruk in 1941, and a number of Australian aircrews flew in support of the Warsaw uprising in 1944. And more recently, in August 2021, the Australian government, working with our friends in Poland, was able to strike a deal to secure more than 1 million Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines to help support our vaccination campaign and the outbreak last year, of course, in Sydney. Our vaccination campaign, which has been one of the most successful in the world, I might add. We are grateful to our Polish friends, our many, many Polish friends, for this assistance and at one of the most serious times of the pandemic here in Australia. Closer to home, and highlighting a connection of the Riverina, my electorate, and the Central West to Poland, I'm proud that the town of Cowra, known for being home to Australia's Peace Bell, holds an annual festival each year known as the Festival of International Understanding. This festival highlights the customs and traditions of a different country each year, and in 2006, Poland was the feature country. Regrettably, I was not the local MP at the time. Cowra was then in Hume, but from all accounts there was plenty of traditional dancing, Polish cuisine such as pierogi, potatoes, sauerkraut, pickled cucumbers and plenty, I'm told, of vodka. Turning to trade, Poland is a growing market for Australia. Between 2015 and 19, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade reported that two-way trade between our two nations experienced growth of 11.2% per annum, valued at nearly $20 billion. That's a lot of money. Our major exports to Poland include coal, ores and other concentrates. The Riverina and Central West is home to a number of mines, not coal mines, but gold and copper mines, with CMOC North Parks Mining Parks and Evolution Mining at Lake Cowell near West Wyalong. I trust and hope that some of the exceptional minerals that are extracted from the ground there make their way to Poland. In 2018, Australia was proud to host a visit of the President of Poland, and just as we were pleased to welcome His Excellency Mr Andrzej Duda, in just the same way he welcomed the President, we usually, when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, welcome thousands of Polish visitors to our shores. And when those borders are lifted, I'm sure they're going to be flocking back to work, to visit, to play, to catch up, of course, with relatives. Up until June 2020, we welcomed about 17,400 tourists to Australia, almost 500 working holiday makers, and that shows the great relationship between Australia and Poland. With the borders reopening very soon, I encourage more Polish tourists to come back and consider visiting my electorate, from Warsaw to Wagga Wagga, and indeed they will certainly be very, very welcome, and they can come and they can pick cherries at Young, they can help out wherever they can as a farmhand or in any of our other great industries throughout the electorate, and perhaps they may even make lifelong memories. And today being St Valentine's Day, maybe they might even come to Australia and fall in love, not just with the place, but indeed with some Australian here, and further strengthening the strong ties that Australia and Poland indeed have enjoyed for 50 years, and may this association continue for many more years to come.
The question is the motion be agreed to, and I give the call to member for Newcastle and extend my own happy Valentine's Day to everybody in the spirit of the member for Riverina. The member for Newcastle has the call.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and it's with great pleasure that I rise to speak on this motion before the House today, because this Sunday, the 20th of February 2022, marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Australia and Poland. This is indeed a significant milestone which underlines the very strong partnership between our nations. It's an important occasion that is most certainly worth recognising and celebrating in the Australian Parliament today. The contribution of the Polish community to Australia's social, cultural and economic life is immense. And it's estimated that some over 200,000 Australians have Polish ancestry, and as well as celebrating this important milestone, I want to take some time today to acknowledge the enormous contribution of Poles to my community of Newcastle. And it's certainly one of the largest group of migrants to come to Newcastle as part of the post-war wave of migration were the Polish people, and they have changed our city for the better in so many ways. There was the very first intake of displaced peoples from the post-war Europe arrived in Newcastle, in the Hunter region, via the port of Newcastle back in 1949. And up until 1960, there was a migrant camp established in a town called Greta in the Hunter that became home to more than 100,000 people, representing some 18 different nations from war-ravaged Europe that were passing through that camp. But the Polish community were indeed amongst that group of 18 nations. Around 10,000 babies were actually born in the Greta migrant camp during its lifespan. And while there's nothing really left of that camp anymore, there are exceptional strong memories when you talk to members of the Polish community in Newcastle of that place. It was a city unto itself. It had its own water and sewage and a hospital and a transport division, buses, ambulances, the whole works, cinemas. People have very fond memories of all sorts of activities that they were organising at the time. And men from the migrant camp in Greta were sent all around the place to go to work. And many of those men, in fact, came into Mayfield in my electorate to stay at a hostel that was very close to the BHP Steelworks, where many of those men were sent to work. And whilst that old Mayfield hostel in Mayfield West is off limits now, the building has survived all these years. One of the men who arrived in Newcastle in 1949 and grew up at the Greta camp was the late John Gebhardt, and I really want to pay tribute to his enormous contribution both to the local Polish community but as the founder of the Ethnic Communities Council in our region that has become the Hunter Multicultural Communities. John Gebhardt's daughter is now the CEO of that organisation, but he really spearheaded a dedicated sort of focus on delivering adequate services, supporting refugees settling in the region, and fought really hard on issues of education, aged care services and community development. I also want to take some time to acknowledge Victor Lupish, another Novocastrian who arrived on one of those first ships coming into Newcastle in 1949, a life member of the Hunter Multicultural Communities, and played a vital role in ensuring the Greta Migrants Camp is a rich part of our history. There are so many people who are currently serving on the executive of the Polish community in Newcastle that I would like to acknowledge. I'm not going to have time to name them all today, but the former President, Janina Kosciulsko, has been an extraordinary influence in our region, as is the current President Marek Beretz and their time. The community still runs a fabulous Polish school, and that's an important part in our community. But it would be remiss of me, I was fortunate to meet with the Polish ambassador last year to talk about this milestone occasion, and whilst we're all focused on this today, I think there is also great concern about what's happening in Poland's neighbour of Ukraine now. And I would just like to say, whilst we stand in solidarity with the Australian-Ukraine community at this difficult time, Australia should be looking to support Poland in its efforts to build resilience and civil society in Ukraine and support in every way we can.
Time has expired.